Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami, Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi, Gauravani Pacharine Nirvise Sanjivari Paschati this time. So we're going to continue talking about Prabhupada. I want to tell you something I read that's so interesting that Prabhupada said. Prabhupada said that in order to explain Krishna consciousness, as Krishna does in Bhagavad Gita, you'll have to make some judgments about people's behavior. That this behavior is right, this behavior is wrong. So we have to make the judgment. And he said that that's a requirement, to distinguish between right and wrong is a requirement of a teacher, any teacher, religious or otherwise. And then he said, but you can't criticize, you can't make judgment unless you are beyond the judgment that you're making. You can't criticize for someone for doing what you do. So he said that that's the difficulty of preaching. Because you have to make judgments, but you can't be guilty of the judgments you make. So otherwise it's hypocrisy. So that's the challenge. And also the beauty of preaching, the beauty of sharing, is that you have to be an example. We need more light, I think. So, yeah. And I heard a devotee told me something yesterday, which is very funny, about criticism. So, one other thing before I tell you about criticism. Another thing I heard about Prabhupada, I think we may have put this on Facebook. A man saw a picture of Prabhupada, and he was a person who could tell the greatness of someone by their physiology. The measurements of their facial features, their limbs, and so on. So he got out a thread and he was doing measurements on the picture, Prabhupada's forehead, his ears. And he said that the four acharyas, or the four sampradayas, there are four great sampradayas in the history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. You may have read about them. One comes from Lakshmi, it's called the Sri, and you'll find that in South India, right? Sri Sampradaya. Followers of Ramanuja. Nimbarka, Vishnu, Rudra Sampradaya, like that. And this person said that all four acharyas are within Prabhupada. So he's like, channeling these four. It wasn't explained, but it's like they're there with him. He's like Lord Chaitanya embodied all the four acharyas. So he's like, an embodiment of these great acharyas, obviously. I think in a sense it's obvious. Okay, so you want to hear a little joke about criticism. So criticism is like your armpit. Everybody has one. It smells bad, and it shouldn't be shown to others. Hare Krishna. So don't show your armpits, okay? All right. So we will continue reading from where we left off. And sharing the ocean of Prabhupada Nectar. We may start another series, which is all the jokes Prabhupada said, or all the funny things he said. I may have a devotee who wants to collect all those statements. That would be interesting, huh? So, yes. Okay. I told this story before, but let's read it. A devotee told Prabhupada, I should be president because the president is not chanting his rounds. Prabhupada asked, how do you know that? He told me, Prabhupada replied immediately. Then he should be president because he is honest. You know, there's a I think an interesting fact you may or may not know about Prabhupada, but it's important to know. When you read Prabhupada's books, you know, some principles are quite strict, and you just get the impression that these principles are meant to be followed exactly as they are stated and followed by everyone, which in general is the case. But here we have, you know, really the opposite. You know, the president is not chanting his rounds, and we could see that Prabhupada was making an excuse for the president because he wanted him to be president and he liked him and he felt he could do a good job, even though he wasn't chanting 16 rounds. Now, generally, if someone is not chanting 16 rounds, we would say, well, you know, you're not qualified to be president, right? So, because Prabhupada is not a robot and he has different relationships with different people, in some cases, he may appear to contradict himself because in this case, he wanted this person to be president and he liked him. So even though he was doing something wrong, Prabhupada overlooked it. Of course, we can say, well, Prabhupada can do that. How can we do that? But the point is that what Prabhupada says or what he writes doesn't always indicate what he does. He doesn't always do that because there are sometimes higher principles that play into the equation, like relationship, what is best in a particular time, and how who Prabhupada feels could best serve and what is best for the devotee. So he may contradict or contravene his own instruction sometimes. This morning, we were having a discussion, my wife and I, about the position of women in religious movements. And some devotees wrote me and said that they wanted me to explain more about women in regards to what protection means. And so, you know, there are statements Prabhupada and our Shastras make about women, you know, that are explained in different ways at different times by different devotees. And I said, and this is something I feel strongly about, that many times I can't completely understand what Prabhupada means until I understand what he's doing in regard to that instruction. So what does Prabhupada mean about women? Well, let's look at how he treats them. If he means A, if he says A and that's what he means, why did he treat them another way? So that gives a time, place, circumstance understanding of how Prabhupada would take an instruction, but maybe sometimes apply it differently or not even apply it at all in that situation. Like sometimes, you know, you'd find situations where Prabhupada would tell the devotees to do something, say, but Prabhupada, you said such and such. He said, yes, but now I'm saying this. So Prabhupada was strict, but not inflexible. So that's important to understand. It's not meant to be used as an excuse and say, well, Prabhupada said that, but probably he didn't mean it. No, you have to have evidence. But I'm just saying, here this story is evidence of Prabhupada apparently contradicting himself. I mean, you can't live in a temple if you don't chant 16 rounds. What to speak of be a temple president? But Prabhupada liked this temple president. He had faith in him. He had a good relationship with him and he wanted him to remain in that position. So he overlooked that. So I think that's important, especially for those of us who love rules and regulations. We have to be careful if we're managing other people, because then we'll manage not by affection, we'll manage by rules. Rules need to be there, of course, but they shouldn't outweigh human relationships. right? Then, as Prabhupada said, we're not the International Society for Rules and Regulations. He meant that we don't want, we obviously have rules and regulations, but we don't want to make that like the essence. The essence of the rule and regulation is to remember Krishna. That's why we do them. If you replace, why do we do all these rules? I don't know, because they're in the books, 500 years from now. We'll forget that the purpose of the rules and regulations is to remember Krishna. And then we'll think, what's the purpose of the rules and regulations? The purpose of the rules and regulations is to follow rules and regulations. And then we'll become a society of rules and regulations. So Prabhupada didn't want that. Because then it disturbs human relationships. And we don't want to manage simply by law. You broke this law, therefore we're throwing you in your room for a week without prasadam. That's the punishment. It's not the way Prabhupada wanted us to do it. We require rules, there's no question. But how do you see the rules? How do you enforce the rules? The rules are for people. They're being enforced by leaders who have relationships with people. And also, another thing we see, Prabhupada, clearly enunciated and lived by the motto that you can't force anybody. Everything must be voluntary. So that's why sometimes we, as his disciples, wanted to condemn someone who's not following the rules, or have some, give them some kind of punishment for it. There should be some reaction. And although Prabhupada may have done that at times, the general mood was it's voluntary. You can't force. So he had that, here are the rules, here are the principles. The goal of the rules is to love Krishna. Take them, you'll benefit. I can't force you. So he managed that way. Not that he's going to hate you if you can't follow, but you really are the loser if you don't follow. Okay, here's another one. This one is really funny. It just shows you Prabhupada's expertise as management. Any of you have been to the Krishna Balaram temple, you know that every hour they ring the bell. 24 hours a day, there's a bell in front of the temple. And the chokidar, the security guard, rings the bell. So here's the story about ringing the bell, which is funny. You ready for a funny story? From the Krishna Balaram temple construction site, turn right and head toward the Prikram path. No, this is another story. In case we don't come across that story, I'll tell it to you. I thought this is another story. Just an interesting story. So Prabhupada said that the chokidar should ring the bell every hour. And he said, why? All night. He said, why? He said, because that way we know he's not sleeping. If you tell him not to ring the bell all night, he'll just sleep all night, but he's got to ring every hour. So he's not sleeping. Funny, huh? Here's a funny story. From the Krishna Balaram temple construction site, we would go right and head toward the Parikrama path. Every morning at 6:03, when we reached a crossroad, a sadhu crossed our path. I looked at my watch when he passed, and if it didn't say 6:03 a.m., I would reset my watch. That sadhu he would be there exactly every day at 6:03. And if your watch said 6:04, you knew your watch wasn't working. You put it to 6:03. He was that regulated. I knew a devotee like that. If I just hung out with him, I knew what time it was because he did everything all day on time. So if he just knew his schedule and had it memorized, you'd know what time it was. I would reset my watch. Eventually, Prabhupada and the sadhu greeted each other every morning. Prabhupada had a very regulated life. He said regulation is the prevention of disease. Um, um, Regulation, cleanliness, and freedom from anxiety. Irregulation, uncleanliness, and anxiety are the three causes of disease. And Prabhupada, this may be Ayurvedic, and Prabhupada said, but the main cause, about 90%, is anxiety, stress. So if you are not healthy and you're in stress, it's probably the stress is a major contributor. And to become healthy, you would need to be in a less stressful situation. It's a funny story. It's a long story short. Prabhupada was in London and he met a man who he had met in India, and now he met him in London. And the man said, oh no, he met him in India, saw him in London, met him in India, and they were in a doctor's clinic in India. And the man said, now you are here in the clinic. You were there in London, now you're here. Isn't this a small world? Prabhupada answered, yes, it is insignificant. Small world, isn't it insignificant? I think there's a philosophical twist on everything. Okay. Okay, so this is a little conversation about the word Prabhu. The word Prabhu, the literal translation is master. And the practice of calling one another, it's unfortunate that we don't know Sanskrit or Hindi, because when we say Prabhu, it can have all kinds of meanings for us, because we don't actually know the literal meaning. Or even we know the literal meaning, but when we say it, we may not be thinking what it means. But the idea of calling another Prabhu is to obviously develop a humble attitude, respectful attitude, to see others as better than ourselves, see ourselves as servants, because that's our identity. So it's like calling ourselves Das. I could call you Inna Prabhu, or I could call myself Mahatma Das. It's kind of like the same idea, I am servant, you are master. Das.We, that's Bengali. I am your Das. Das osmi, asmi, asmi, I am Das, your Das. So when disciples would pay obeisances to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he would return those obeisances by saying, Das osmi, I am your servant. So, we have an obvious problem in the material world that when you have a very elevated position, you can misuse it by thinking that you're better and misuse your power for your own benefit rather than the benefit of the people you're serving. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is this powerful, famous acharya being worshipped by thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, because he's a real sadhu. They worship him. And his vision of everyone is, I'm your servant. So nothing could ever move him out of that position. So right now I can say, I am your servant. Rasika, I am your servant. Alina, I am your servant. Srijan, I am your servant. But what if tomorrow one of my videos goes viral and it gets 10 billion hits and I'm the most famous person in the world? And then I start thinking, now I'm the boss. I'm famous. You all are nothing. Nobody knows about you. Who cares about you? And because I got 10 billion hits, I've got all these royalties from YouTube. So, I'm buying a new mansion and a new car, BMW, this and that. And so then I think, I'm better than everybody just because I have some money and fame. So the idea of Prabhu is No matter what your position is, you always remember your position is the same. You're a servant. But when our position changes externally, then our consciousness changes with it. Oh, now I'm better. I'm better than you because I have more money in the bank, right? I have more likes on Facebook. How many Facebook followers you have? You only have 300. I have 300,000. You're nothing. You're a loser. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is showing that even though you are the spiritual master of thousands and honored by hundreds of thousands more, you never lose connection with the I am servant mood. So now when I read this, it'll, I think, ring even more clear. As we rode along on a train, Prabhupada showed me the proper perspective in regarding other devotees as Prabhu or master. The idea is to be humble and to serve others as if they are your Prabhus. If someone calls you Prabhu and you think, yes, I am the master, that is not the idea. He imitated a puffed up person with a swollen chest and a mock silly look on his face. When I call you Prabhu, it is in the spirit of service, and that way you are my master. No, he said, yes, I'm the master. Then he did that. But then he explained, when I call you Prabhu, it is in the spirit of service. In that way, you are my master. Yeah, so that's the idea. So now when we use this word Prabhu, and hopefully we'll remember what it means. Prabhu, don't do that. Prabhu, you're so stupid. Prabhu, you ever see devotees do that? Like you're calling someone Prabhu, and in the same breath you're chastising them. Yeah, it's like, that's because we don't, Sanskrit's not our first language. So we call someone master and chastise them. Come over here, master. I'm going to beat you in the face. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Oh, this story is amazing. You ready for an amazing story? You don't have to believe it if you don't want to. I'm just reading it. All you faithless people out there, you may not believe this, but I'm just going to read it to you. I'll leave it up to you, whether you believe it or not. Of course, you'll say, I have no reason not to believe it. Well, after you hear, you'll decide. So Prabhupada is on the balcony in Mayapur. He walked up and down the balcony with me, then turned towards the fields. He looked out and said, quote, the farmers beg Krishna for rainwater. Give me water, give me water. He then said, all right, take it, like he's Krishna speaking. He majestically swept his hand down as if dispensing rain. All right, take it. Simultaneously, as he did this, a lightning bolt crashed the sky open and rain came furiously down. Take it, he said quietly, and walked back into his room. Hare Krishna. What do you think? You believe it? Yeah. If you have a drought, just call a pure devotee. Create some rain. I think I personally like these kinds of stories because we should never take Prabhupada's position for granted. And even though Prabhupada didn't publicly display any of these kinds of powers, it's always nice to remember that this person, although he has no need to display such powers, at least he wouldn't display them publicly. He has them. It's part of the mystic power of a pure devotee. So here's the butterfly story. This is so nice. I told the story, but I didn't tell all the details. So We will read it. One morning, Prabhupada smiled and said, I was just thinking of you, and you have come. This is Guru Das telling these stories. I sat down, and as Prabhupada seemed to be in a meditative mood, I also sat silently. Content just to be with him. A butterfly was circling the room and fluttering towards Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada put out his finger and motioned slightly with it. In easy flight, the butterfly jumped into His Divine Grace's finger. This butterfly must be a great devotee, I thought. I had my camera with me and thought of taking a photo. As Prabhupada raised his hand slowly to show me the perching butterfly. I really wanted to photograph this scene, but I didn't want it to disturb the moment with the movement of a loud camera shutters. In those days, cameras made noise. It was like the old 35 millimeter cameras. So they had shutters that would actually mechanically open and close. Then the butterfly lazily flew up to a corner of the room. Prabhupada immediately changed expressions and started talking to me about the day's activities and an upcoming program. The butterfly began to fly around the room again. Srila Prabhupada noticed it and pointed towards the window, silently indicating to open the window so the butterfly could go out. Otherwise, he will not have anything to eat. His face and mood had changed again, so completely and so easily. I felt like I was in a scene in Krishna Loka. We were talking the other day in class about Prabhupada's concern about the insects. Here's an example, concerned about a butterfly. And after I told that story, here I was observing all the insects here in Alachua at night in front of our house because there's a light there. There's all these insects buzzing around the light. There's like lots, like a lot. And we have different little creatures on our property. They dig little holes, gophers and turtles and rabbits and deer. Like, who cares about all of them? Well, Krishna cares. I'm looking at all these animals. I'm going, wow, nobody's skinny. Like, where are they getting all their food? It's so interesting, isn't it? So Krishna cares about them. He feeds them. But after reading those stories, I was thinking, like, okay, here's all these insects. Have I ever actually thought, are these insects getting fed? Sometimes I go out at night and feed the mosquitoes, not intentionally, but I do my seva, feed them prasadam. Yeah, so it's interesting. One morning in Calcutta, across from a bathing ghat, Prabhupada was sitting on the floor. I have fooled them, he said. Who? I asked. The mosquitoes. When I sit on the floor, they rise to the ceiling. He was grinning like a child. I asked, are there mosquitoes in Krishna Loka? He answered, they don't bite, they sing. Yes. Prabhupada was asked that question. A few other devotees. You always wonder, are there snakes in Krishna Loka? Are there, there's Ananta Sesh. He's the biggest snake. There's Lord Balaram, expanding as Ananta Sesh. Everything is there. Oh, yeah. Okay, here's another interesting one. And Jamuna has told a similar story. This is really amazing to meditate on. We say that the spiritual master, the pure devotee, has lotus feet. So here's a story about lotus feet. This is another one of those, you can believe it if you want to stories. I'm just going to read it. This is really interesting. The early morning air was wintry and cold, and our breath made smoke like patterns in the frosty air. As we walked, I saw a worm heading right for Prabhupada's feet. He means under his feet. Hey, Prabhupada's going to step on the worm. No one else in our group saw the worm. It was on a direct collision course with His Divine Grace's lotus feet. Thought maybe I should say something and save the worm's life. But then again, if the worm went under Srila Prabhupada's boots, it would be liberated. Like, what do you do? Difficult decision, right? Should I let Prabhupada step on the worm? Or should I tell Prabhupada, don't step on the worm? There was a happy solution, and he didn't have to do anything. I thought maybe I should say something and save the worm's life. And then again, if the worm went under Prabhupada's boots, it would be liberated. Just as those who fall under the wheels of Lord Jagannath's cart are liberated. As I was philosophizing, and before I could make a decision, the worm was under Prabhupada's foot. Then I saw that there was no impression in the tall, wet grass where Prabhupada walked, whereas our sneakers made deep depressions. I looked back and saw that the worm was still going merrily on his way as we walked on with Prabhupada landing. Jamuna tells a story. She was walking behind Prabhupada, wet grass, and she didn't see any footprints. And she asked Prabhupada, why are there no footprints? And if I remember correctly, maybe some of you know, I read this a while ago, something to the effect that someday you'll understand. So she's collaborating the same story. Prabhupada walked in wet grass and there are no footprints, but you see everyone else's footprints. It's not just a condition that there were no footprints due to some particular certain, situations, but everyone had footprints but Prabhupada. Someday you'll understand. Seems like Prabhupada's walking above the earth, doesn't it? Hare Krishna. My dear devotees, I just want to say, we are so fortunate to have Prabhupada as our guru. There are so many other gurus out there, as you know. And one way you can understand the power of a guru is by seeing that guru's effect on his followers. And so, Prabhupada picked up the people from the street and made them sadhus. That's like unprecedented practically in the history of the world, at least on this scale. So we're so fortunate. And another thing that Prabhupada did, which sometimes is even problematic for some devotees, and I'll explain why. Prabhupada represented the Shastras exactly. So sometimes those Shastras don't really relate to us, but he's just presenting the principles and the philosophy, even if it's, applicable millions of years ago. But his job is to represent the Siddhanta of the Shastras. And then, of course, we apply it according to time and place. So that's what Prabhupada did. He was a preserver. He didn't make up anything, You see all these gurus today, God, they're like, you ever hear any of these other gurus? They say things, but you're like, where did he get that idea? Where did that come from? And you realize it just came from his imagination. Prabhupada uses the word jugglery. And in the 12th canto of Bhagavatam, when it describes the qualities of Kali Yuga, it says that the person who can juggle words the best will be considered the best scholar. You know, and I've seen also that. I was just having a discussion the other day. Actually, it was yesterday. So we're going to be doing Brahma Samhita again, and we're going to be rereading the translations. And I forgot where I was going with this. Wow. What was I saying? How did I go to the Brahma Samhita? Oh yeah, I think, anyway, some of the words, phrases are not understandable. We're thinking of changing some things. I forgot where I was going with this, but anyway, Prabhupada, you know, he took his job very seriously of exactly delivering. Like, I'm going to deliver this like to your door. You may not even be able to know, you may not even know what it is or how to use it, but this is what the doctor said, I give it to you. So that's why we're so fortunate. He just gives it exactly. Yeah. As Prabhupada say that often these gurus, you know, their brains are very fertile, very imaginative. They come up with all kinds of ideas about Shastra. If you are unfortunate enough to listen to some of these modern Indian spiritual teachers, they come up with some very fertile explanations of Shastra, which actually have nothing to do with the standard Acharya's explanations. Isn't it? Shujan, you must have heard very creative explanations of Shastra, right? Anyway, I forgot what I was going to say. Maybe I was going to say something offensive. Krishna didn't let me. Okay, I'm going to read something else. Here's some sayings. You want to hear some sayings by Prabhupada quoted? You can buy a sacred thread for a penny, but love of God is not so cheap. I have come here to teach what you have forgotten, love of God. Listen to this one. This is a nice one. Do everything together. For if there is success, then everyone is glorified. And if there is failure, then no one is to be blamed. So if you're really worried about failing, do it in a group. Then you can all take the credit for failing. And but if you do it in a group, you can't take individual credit for succeeding. You'll all have to take credit, but you'll all take credit for failing also. So that way it's easier. If you're worried about failing, it's easier to fail in a group. Right? It doesn't feel so bad, right? And so this is from Gandhi. A clenched fist cannot shake hands. I guess Prabhupada quoted these things. A clenched fist cannot shake hands. Be yourself, everyone else is taken. The nightingale desists to sing until it has something pleasing to say. That's nice. Okay. Now, I think we have a problem that I need to read more. I have some things from I think one of the initial classes I have, but I think I have, like, I was reading other things this morning. So let's take some questions. Actually, we're in today's class is shorter, so yeah, let's take some questions. Let's see what happens. If there's any on Facebook, who's our Facebook guru today?
I already passed the question from Facebook.
Anuradha says, does it mean to be beyond the judge? No, it means, no, the statement is to be beyond judgment. Whoa. To be beyond judgment. That if I'm going to judge you, Anuradha, that you're sleeping too much or eating too much or whatever you're doing wrong, if I'm going to judge, Anuradha does not eat and sleep too much. She eats and sleeps too little. Anuradha, eat and sleep more. If I'm going to judge you, then I cannot be committing the same fault. I cannot have the same faults for which I'm judging you. So Prabhupada, it was making this point. The way I understood it was, here's a warning to you that if you're going to teach Krishna consciousness, it's quite a responsibility, because you will have to point out the illusion people are in. You'll have to point out the wrong ways in which people think. You'll have to point out the wrong things people do. And you can't point it out if you're doing them yourself. So you have to actually be a teacher. Then Prabhupada said, he said, there are many, many people who are very intelligent and very qualified as teachers, but a teacher cannot be a teacher unless they behave properly. So, of course, in our society, your academic qualifications is what will get you the job, not your moral qualification. Although you have to obviously have some. But in Varnashram, in traditional society, the teachers had the highest moral qualification within society. They were teachers and priests. So they had to be exemplary. And because people learn by example, obviously, right? So how can you have a teacher that don't smoke and they're smoking a cigarette? But Professor, you're smoking and you're telling us not to smoke. Yeah, just do what I say, don't do what I do. But that doesn't work. So that's Prabhupada's point. So it puts a lot of onus on those who are going to teach Krishna consciousness to be examples of what they're teaching. I don't think this point has really been stressed enough in our movement, because we stress, we'll just share Krishna consciousness because it's good for you. And that's true also. Whatever level you're on, share. But if you are going to judge the behavior of others, or point out to people in general that such and such behavior is not proper, you at least have to be on your way to following the proper behavior, right? Otherwise, it's hypocritical. And we know that one of the reasons people do not join religious movements, and one of the reasons people leave religious movements, is because hypocrisy. If an average person does what a priest does, people won't bat an eye. But when a priest does it, you expect more, right? So if I'm telling you to not do something and to do something, you expect that I would follow it. So that was Prabhupada's point. And then again, Prabhupada's defining teacher. That's what a teacher is. You can't be a teacher just because you know. You have to be a teacher because you apply what you know in your life. And you might say, well, what if I'm a math teacher? There's nothing, I apply math. Yeah, when I go shopping, I apply it. That's not what we're talking about. But a teacher in general must be exemplary. That's at least within the Varnashram system. Teachers are in the mode of goodness. They're moral, upright, because they're exemplars. Even if you teach math, still you're an exemplar as a teacher. In traditional societies, teachers are honored very highly. Did you know that? In Mexico, I noticed that they have great respect for teachers. In China, they have great respect for teachers. In America, they have Teachers' Day. American culture is like, it's kind of over. We used to have some culture. It seems kind of to be over now. Teachers are not respected. Not that they're disrespected, they're just, sometimes they are disrespected. They're not really well respected. One devotee told me that she teaches a class in Dubai or somewhere in the UAE. And her students won't even go into the class until she goes in. So they'll wait outside, and then they'll greet her, and then she'll go in, and then they will go in, because that's their culture. So you will find that in traditional cultures, great respect is given to the teacher. But you would also find that there's a reason for that, because the teachers deserved it. Because not only the sacrifice they make for their students, but because they're exemplary in their behavior. So teacher, we say like worship the guru, guru is as good as God. But in a broader sense, guru means teacher, not just someone who's a spiritual teacher. Guru is a word for teacher. And so that culture is there. Any teacher. You have your sitar guru, you have your martial arts guru, you have your professor guru, you have so many gurus in India. And you will find that in many ways that people will treat their teachers like we would treat our guru, because they see them because the teacher is respected. And Westerners sometimes have this problem. Why do you respect your teacher so much? Why do you bow down? Why do you do all that? I don't want to bow down to anybody. Understandably, they don't want to, because they don't trust anybody, or they've been exploited or cheated by teachers, by superiors. So it's understandable. But at the same time, it's not really inbuilt, at least into culture here in America. But traditional cultures, it's all, teachers are all given the utmost respect. But of course, if teachers don't deserve that respect at a certain point, then the students will think, why am I giving respect to this person? They're no better than I am. Or maybe I'm better than them. They should respect me. Isn't it? So, there is a hierarchy of respect. Teachers are very high on that hierarchy. Kings are very high. Parents are very high. But we can understand that in that traditional hierarchy, if the king or the parent or the guru did not act properly, their followers didn't have to follow them, or the Brahmins would remove them. So in Kali Yuga, it's kind of like people want respect. They want to demand it, but they don't always deserve it. And so when you have to give respect to someone who demands it but doesn't deserve it, the system doesn't work, because it has to be both. Students give respect, but there has to be a respectable teacher to receive it. So that means for ourselves, as teachers of Krishna consciousness, we have to be living respectable Brahminical life, following as best we can what we're teaching. Otherwise, it doesn't work. That's the responsibility you get as a teacher, which is, it's a good responsibility, it's purifying. But you have to be able to do it. Pi says, Pi? I forgot. Yeah, Pi. P, Pi. How come I forgot? You have to spell out your name. I forgot. Bad memory. Talking about criticism, I think there's a fine line sometimes between defending myself and criticizing others. Of course, it's all about the wording. I feel, or you do. But is criticism always bad? If someone hurts us with their behaviors, what can we do instead if we can't tell them what? Well, I can tell you what to do. Just listen to the last class, or the last two. Was it the last class? I can't remember if it was the last class. One recent class, we discussed this threadbare. I think it was the last one. So if you go back, you will get your answer to this question and questions surrounding this question. But I'll give you the short answer. To say something, someone has done something wrong is not criticism. If they've actually done something wrong and you're not trying to bring them down, you're just trying to resolve the situation. And obviously, we've seen in ISKCON in earlier years where some devotees were mistreated. So sometimes it could have been a wife, or it could have been a devotee in a temple who had a president who was very, very hard on them. And they accepted the mistreatment as Krishna's mercy, and they accepted it with tolerance, which of course is our philosophy. We should be tolerant and we should see everything as Krishna's mercy. But in some cases, it damaged them. They weren't actually able to do it. So, part of these questions of how I should respond will depend on how you're being affected by it. And so, let's say you were being criticized, and I would try to help you see it in a certain way so you wouldn't be affected by it. But if I see that due to your past experiences in life, you're very sensitive to criticism, and I could see that this criticism is really destructive for you psychologically, then I would say, get away from it. Don't tolerate it. Take it to higher authorities. You have to get this person to stop this because this person could destroy you. So I've seen this also. We all have different tolerance levels, right? And someone who has low tolerance to criticism, and there may be many reasons why, can get very damaged by regular criticism. So they have to be careful. In the name of tolerance, you could end up harming yourself, allowing yourself to be harmed. So you have to be careful. And then one day you can just have a breakdown and you don't realize what happened. And in retrospect, you say, yeah, I was just holding in. I was taking abuse and I was trying to tolerate it. But I see now that was unhealthy because I just exploded. You ever had that explosion happen to you? And you realized that it was just that you should have not tolerated so much. You should have actually tried to discuss the problem with the person who was putting you down or whatever they were doing that upset you. So, it's like Prabhupada said, when you're going to try to practice Krishna consciousness, it's like lifting weights. You have to know how much you can lift. So how many pounds of tolerance can you lift? If you try to lift more, it's good that you're trying. You should try to be as tolerant as possible, right? But if realistically speaking, you understand that you have a tolerance level and it's actually harming you, and it's going to show up in a negative way in your life, and it's going to affect your spiritual life, then it wouldn't make sense. You just realize this is I can't tolerate more than this. I'm not capable of it at this point in my life. And I have to just honestly acknowledge that and deal with it realistically. Does that make sense? And not feel bad about it, just acknowledge this, I remember when we first went to India, a lot of devotees got hepatitis. And as I remember, there were certain foods, I can't remember whether it was milk or yogurt, that they couldn't eat. And so we'd have these sabjis, and I think it was maybe yogurt they couldn't eat, or sour cream. And we'd have these sabjis, really good sabjis. And they wouldn't eat them. And I would think, why aren't you eating them? And they'd say, my liver doesn't work. I can't digest it. So it's something like that. My tolerance liver is, it's not functioning well. So I can't digest all this criticism. Okay, you should be able to in a healthy state, but you're not healthy, so you have to deal with it. Right? So that's where you have shastric knowledge of what you should do, but you have to be realistic. If at a certain point in trying to follow it, it's backfiring, and then you're building up resentment towards someone, and that's going to come out, and then you're going to offend somebody, or it's going to negatively impact your sadhana because you get so disturbed you can't chant, then it's not good. Does that make sense? My wife once said something that really impacted me. She was teaching a class on the 6 human needs. What they are, why we need to fulfill them, and how to fulfill them. And as part of the class, what I found the most interesting part of that class is that there was, we say, okay, you have these needs as a human being. You need security, you need variety, you need nurturing, you need to contribute to society, you need to be acknowledged, so forth. I forget all of them. And so she said there are healthy ways of fulfilling those needs and there are unhealthy ways. So, we all want acknowledgement, right? So like a child may do something bad to get acknowledged because their parents are neglecting them. So when they start a fire in the house, they'll get acknowledged. They'll get yelled at, but at least they get acknowledged. They got their attention. So that's an unhealthy way of getting acknowledged. And a healthy way of getting acknowledged is just help people, and people will acknowledge you for all the love and you're giving them, right? So it just comes by, acknowledging others, you'll get acknowledged. It's a healthier. So, there can even be unhealthy ways to tolerate. There can be unhealthy ways to do good things. That's the point. Does that make sense? Last question. If we can't feed plants, it's an option to chant the Mahamantra trees. Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Why not? And to insects. Okay. I think we've come to the end. Not the end. Everything's always beginning in the spiritual world, but we've come to the end of today's class. It's time for more light. Shed light. So now I have to meditate on what we're going to talk about with japa. I've just been working on a slideshow. We're doing level 2 at the end of, I think, October 23rd. We're going to do level 2 japa.